Bit of a first cup of coffee of the morning ramble here. As I was thinking about some announcement that came out about graphics cards and thinking about how these things have gone over the years, because I distinctly remember a while ago, computer parts didn't consume a lot of power. And I vaguely remember there being a discussion somewhere about something that had to do with NEC or IEC or something like that standards, where you couldn't have a home appliance that consumed more than, I'm guessing, 230 watts or something like that. And thinking about it, I think that was somewhat of a discussion about, like, game consoles. And I think this might be it here. I vaguely remember, I'm pretty sure it was Nintendo at least, had a plug like that. I think the Atari had a wall wart, which is a different kind of clause where it's not allowed to pull more than 50 watts or something like that. Power brick or whatever you want to call it. A block with two prongs on it, you plug it into an outlet and it blocks like the three plugs next to it. But yeah, this plug here tops out at like 2.5 amps. Right there. 2.5 amps max on that plug. And that's not to be confused with this one here that is really sad. 0.2 amps. I mean, your electric razor is not going to consume that kind of power anyway. But what I'm thinking about here is, I don't think that's what was keeping computers at 230 watts, but definitely the consoles. Because computers are using these things. Even back in, like, the XT days. You had the power coming in, and then you had the rocker switch, and then you had the power going up to the monitor. Some of the old, where is that? Some of the old cake boxes, the graphics card would have the actual power going through it up to the monitor. Back then. But, it's like, 230 watts. You can get 500 watt power supplies now, but back when, the IBMs were a thing, you couldn't, you had 75, 150, and I think 230, or 200 was another one that I distinctly remember, but I'm not sure if that was just a compact or a gateway thing, where they're cheaping it 230 down to 200, but and then you go to like baby AT, where you have the push button. You still had a lot of them with the plug to feed power to the monitor. 200, 230 watt. And then you go to ATX, and that's when you start seeing 250, 300s. And then 350s. I'll get to that. But I'm like, sitting here thinking about this. I mean, you could go with this plug here, maybe, that, or one of these was like 15 amps. But maybe this was it here. But you can't plug that into a 15 amp circuit. The NEC requires it to be a different kind of plug that only fits into a 20 amp outlet. Again, margin of error. They're probably thinking like, you have two plugs in an outlet, one of those probably going to a desk lamp. So right off the bat, you don't have the full 15 amps available on that circuit. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a code or something back then, but I'm not seeing it. And all of the like the cake boxes, where is it? The pizza boxes, You know, they had to feed the monitors. Those were like generally you'd be like 120 watts or more for these things. Didn't matter if it was a computer monitor or a CRT TV. The tubes were, I think it was like a heating element or something in them, so that the electron gun would even function. But, you know, back then, the chips really didn't consume a lot of power anyway. You know, this tiny little heatsink here is overkill for that 286, but it was just an experiment. And I'm pretty sure that's a different AOC from the one that makes computer monitors. I kind of noticed that when I was pulling up the picture. It's probably a no-brand thing, because I don't remember where I got this, but it was pretty cheap. I went with it. But you know, back then, ATX version 1.0 spec. This is the 20 pin plug, not 24. There's no 4 pin for the CPU. There's no 8 pin for the CPU. There's no yeah, this was like bottom of the barrel. This was when you started seeing 300 watt power supplies and things, and look at this, 12 watts for the AGP graphics card is really pathetic, but you know, we're talking 90s, so you're, you know, the S3 Savage or the Verge or the MX440, or the long string of letters and numbers that the Intel compatible computers used for like EGA, CGA, and VGA without the S, etc. They didn't consume a lot of power, you know, relative to what we have today. So it's kind of interesting to look back at this spec and say, okay, so, you know, this is thermal considerations of this thing. And then you go to AGP later revision, they're talking about you can't pull any more than 1 amp from the 12 volt rail on the motherboard. I vaguely remember something about one of the graphics card had like a hard drive plug on it to get more power. And then we got revision 1.5. This is for like 4x and 8x AGP. We're starting to up the wattage a little bit on these things. A chapter talking about thermal considerations. And then you got AGP Pro. And this is a completely different animal. The plug is different and everything. The 3.3 is up from 6 to 7.6. The 12 volts now 9.2 from the motherboard. And this is when we finally get something more than, what was it, 12 watts? Yeah, 110 watts. 25, 25, 110 total. So they're talking about the power consumed from slot 1 and then slot 2 and then the total power of the card. And unsupported here implies that, you know, they're pulling more than the 110 watts, 55 watts, or 50 watts. Yeah, 55 watts per slot. Somewhere up here is a mechanical diagram of this. Yeah. But this is like revision 1.0. And I'm not even sure you can get these PDFs anymore. I mean, I had to, like, create an account and log into, like, I don't think it was PCI-SIG, but it was one of those entities, IEEE or something like that, in order to get access to the documents, so I had an idea of what kind of airflow I needed for the computer case mods that I was doing. Because I was having fun turning old XT towers into ATX towers. This was 2008. And this is the PCI Express 2.0 revision. 2.0? Or is that 1.0? Power delivery, CM. Well, anyway, yeah. 300 watts, but this is consuming more than 2 slots worth of space here. 75 watts maximum from the actual slot, and then the rest from the 2x3 or the 2x4 connector. And it almost doesn't even matter at this point, because by the time I had this in my hands and was looking at things and going, okay, so how can I get that kind of airflow through a case? You know, they're talking 55 watts per slot, pretty much, of heat dissipation. And I think it was the 8800 GT. Was 68 watts, I think. Oh, 150. Maybe it was a 6800, right? Oh, 67. Yeah, okay, so it was a 6800 GT. You know, I'm like, that's more than 55 watts per slot. So I pretty much just stopped looking at these things for references of how much power, because, you know, by the time I got this document, I'm sitting down and I'm looking at airflow through the case and running some napkin math of how much airflow per TDP dissipation. There was already a graphics card that exceeded what this was specifying. And ever since then, graphics cards have been just going through the roof on power consumption. I mean, the Pro cards, I'm pretty sure, the like the Teslas, and I'm drawing a blank of the other one that was previous to Tesla. But, yeah, it was like 250 watts for those things. Hey. Why are you doing that? I want to highlight the whole thing. What was the name of that? Deep learning. Oh, this is Quadro. That was the name. Yeah. Quadros and Teslas was like 250 watts for the longest time, but that was like probably limited by the cooling capacity of rack mount units. Man, I'm gonna have to fix this. Because that search engine is like it's given me results for things that have nothing to do with what I was looking for. Radeon 6800. Yeah. I don't think that's a GeForce 6800 GTX. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it was. I don't know what the spec was, but there was something at one time that limited what your household consumer electronics could consume from the wall. And I'm guessing something happened around here, around 2008. It's 2008, right? Yeah. Where they finally got permission to use more than 230 watts, I'm guessing, or 300 or something like that. And graphics cards have been gradually consuming more and more power since then. I don't know what it is. It's like you by the time you figure out cooling and airflow and case, and you get that stuff sorted out, and you start to build your custom computer case, and then you look at the graphics card and realize that this year's model consumes more power than what you had originally planned for. So yeah, I pretty much. I let my membership with whatever that entity was, like, lapse and end, and I actually kind of got disgusted, and after I got an 8600 GT, I just didn't buy another graphics card because I was doing other things, and I just didn't want to fuss with trying to get more airflow into a computer case. Because it gets to the point where it's like, you know, do you really know what 70C feels like? Have you been there? Take a short travel to the Persian Gulf in a metal box that's being baked by the sun all day long. You probably get an idea of what 70C feels like. And there are probably other jokes in there I didn't think about, but yeah, I'm not sure what that code was. It doesn't exist anymore, so, you know, Google doesn't, like, respond with anything when you go to search for it. Unless you know the actual number of the code, probably. But it is kind of interesting that if the C7, C8 coupler here, or plug, you know, if that was the actual limiting factor of why most things didn't consume more than 250 watts for the longest time, not just, again, 7-watt chip. Actually, that's an interesting question. It's 286. How much power did that consume? Um... Okay, let me... Yeah, we got megahertz. Yeah, I'm pretty sure... I'm pretty sure that was like the 12 megahertz one. Nobody knows how many watts the 286 consumed, right? They just know what the megahertz was. Yeah, absolutely nobody knows what. And this search is probably as stupid as it gets. Beyond lobotomized. So you had the S3 Savage. That I think was either 17 or 7 watts or something like that, wasn't it? It also doesn't. Yeah, this search is absolutely useless. From what I hear, they're making Google just as bad. .3 watts. Okay. So yeah, that that is extreme overkill. Alright, S3 Savage. I think Tech Power Up might say what the wattage is. Alright, it doesn't say. Alright, MX440. Oh, you need a 250 watt power supply for this card. Really? Yeah, nobody knows what this thing pulled for power. Right? We don't have a watt graph here, do we? No. Alright. I'm not going to waste my time on that. ATI 7000. 23 watts max. Again, you know, we're talking a 40 by 40 by... They don't have 10. It's like 8 millimeters tall, and then it goes to like... I want to say 14 or 15 millimeters tall. I was actually looking for like a 20 millimeter tall one for something somewhere. And they didn't, you know, I had to settle for like the shorter one. But anyway, yeah, that's Tech Power Up. 23 watts. And there are chipsets that allegedly consume less than 23 watts that they have to put fans on. I mean, the die process back then wouldn't allow you to run a TJ Max of 150C on something like that. You could do it with really crude single transistors that size or something like that, but the tiny little intricate transistors and whatnot, they couldn't model it to the point of knowing what the temperature of each little FET was, so they had to have like a massive margin of error of, well, this transistor turning on and off may be like 10C hotter than the rest of the chips, so we got to draw our maximum at like 70C instead of 80C or something like that for TJ Maxx. But yeah, I mean, these things back then, when this was created, did not consume a lot of power. I mean, your 60-watt processor there was probably a 600 megahertz overclocked K62. I mean, so that might be another reason why, you know, they just couldn't cram that much power into the chips at the time without them melting. So you didn't need more than a 230 watt power supply, but clearly by the time the 6800 rolled around, they were blowing past 50 watts on a graphics card. Now for a 2-slot configuration, maxing out at 110 watts total. That was this one, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But it is kind of interesting because I do remember there used to be something somewhere like a clause where you couldn't have an appliance consuming more than so much power. I just don't remember what it was or where the clause was, or I don't know if it was UL or one of these other regulatory things. And obviously you go into the server realm, even back in the 90s, you could get 1 kilowatt power supplies, but they were like, they would put out 48 volts and then you'd have 48 volt down to whatever on the device. And I'm pretty sure the 48 volt thing is like a holdover from the old telephone system that I think may have worked in the same voltage or somewhere around there. And I'm not really sure because I'm vaguely remembering something about the ringer having spikes that go way higher than that. But or maybe it was 52 volt batteries they used to have in the old phone exchange. I've only seen pictures of that stuff, and by the time I started looking at batteries for backup purposes, the old switchboard system wasn't anymore. They use like solid state things, and they had basic rack mount units that look like any other UPS that you could just purchase somewhere for like a rack mount server or something. They didn't use the tall, thin metal things. But it is kind of interesting there as well how, you know, 12 volts is kind of a holdover from other things. Analog. I'm not sure why they went with 5 volts instead of 6 volts, but again, that might have been something that they decided, well, if we make it just 6 volts, people will go to the local store and get a 6 volt wall wart and try to plug it in, and it'll be too noisy for the the digital circuits to function or something like that, maybe. So they decided to make it something a little bit different. I'm just staring at pictures now, so I'm probably just going to cut the video here. Again, I don't remember what it was, but there was something that... something somewhere that limited what home consumer computers could pull for the longest time. And it wasn't just game consoles, it was like VCRs and stereo equipment and hi-fi stereo equipment. I mean, trying to think of what else you would have in your house back in the day. You know, not quite to the point where you were lucky to have an electric light bulb and there was an outhouse outside that you used because plumbing wasn't a thing. Not quite that far back, but you know, most of your electronics, answering machines, you know, that was the other thing. You know, maybe they limited the computer because they looked at your typical desk and said, okay, we're going to have a printer. I think printers use that plug. Some of them, at least. Or something that looks like that. Maybe it's just a notch on one side. But either way, you had the printer on the desk. That consumes power. You had the old CRT boat anchor. You had a set of speakers. You probably had a cordless telephone. I know, cell phones. It's like, why do you need a cordless phone? Answering machine, because you didn't always used to have like that. You pick up the phone, you hit like some kind of a code, and then you have, I guess, a voicemail, I think it's called. And it's like an answering machine, but it's at the phone company's end instead of a box sitting on your desk. You know, so, they're looking at this and thinking, okay, so there's all this stuff sitting on the desk already consuming power from that outlet on an outlet strip, probably. You're probably not allowed to pull a certain amount of power through that stuff. Yet at the same time, I'm having this vague horror memory of seeing a power strip at a shop with like a buzzsaw, a bandsaw, a drill press, all plugged into this one power strip. Yeah. Some people do some wild things when they're like, hey, I'm just going to turn my garage into a workshop. Oh, I need to run an extension cord out there so I can run my power tools. Anyway. Morning rant over. I need to put coffee in my cup. Probably stare at this some more, but I don't think I'm going to ever find that clause because I vaguely remember a lot of people are like, that's not how it is now. Therefore, it's fake news or false news and yeet 'em because history is shunned, maybe? I don't know. You're probably not allowed to say how it was back in the day for some things. Like, yes, the Nintendo had a plug that sort of looked like that. Anyway, Be cool, y'all.